Thanks everyone for joining. What I want to discuss today is how do we use data in Supersonic in order to build the best games and to actually squeeze the lemon and make them the best business out there. It's a topic that we can cover in a couple of hours, so I'll try to minimize everything to the next 20 minutes, and I'll touch the main highlights of each area, but of course that afterward and later we'll be happy to deep dive into many of these different topics in more detailed way, which takes of course much longer. Just 2 slides about Supersonic, so you understand the background. So we actually founded the company in the beginning of this year in January. We are owned by ironSource, but we're an independent company, a gaming company. ironSource, if you don't know, is today probably the biggest SDK network and growth platform for games. We're based in Tel Aviv, and we're doing both publishing of third parties, of developers out there, and in-house development of games. We actually launched 3 games in the past 6 weeks, Ultimate Disc, Sorted, and Joint Clash, and all of them got to number 1 or 2 in the US and gained more than 15 million installs already. Joint Clash is relatively new. It's our latest launch from a week ago, so it's still around 4 million installs, but no doubt all of these 3 will get to few dozens of millions of installs. And what I want to touch today is how do we pick the game? How do we manage it as a business? How do we scale it to the level that we managed to scale these 3 games in the past 2 months? I'll start with a short intro before we deep dive into the live ops and what happens after the game is out. I'll start with the first step, which probably is how to evaluate the game potential based on data, of course. How do you decide whether to launch a game or not and what to do? So in general, of course, what we are all looking for is a game that can have LTV that is higher than a CPI in scale, right? This is the balance that we are all looking for every game, for every genre. And I think that, I'll drop this here. And I think that in hyper casual or ad-based games, what is crucial always is to start with CPI in order to once fail too quick. Second, because it's very easy with minimum investment to get data from the market, to get actual feedback whether users like the game or not. Considering successful trends, and of course testing a few different videos to make sure that the feedback that you get from the market is really upon the gameplay itself and not upon specific creative that works better or not. What we always do is we are using several campaigns with several different videos to make sure that, again, we are actually able to understand the real marketability of a game on its very, very early stage. We're looking mainly on CPI, CTR, and CVR, and we're looking for everything that feels us that it can be marketable in scale. In general, of course, hyper casual, we're looking at the range of 30 cents CPI in the US iOS to get a good indication that users actually like it. We're also looking at the CTR. Sometimes we start with the CTR and we're looking at the percentage of the CTR, hopefully to be more than 5, etc. But my message here is that always start with the CPI, have several creatives to make sure that the data is not biased toward a specific video or a specific edited video, and look at all metrics which are mainly CPR, CTR, CVR to understand the marketability perspective of the game. Then before we are deciding whether we continue this game or not, we are also looking at and trying to predict based on the data that we have, what will be the LTV of such game, right? We are looking at the playtime, we're looking at the retention, we're trying to evaluate what LTV can we achieve after adding ads, after adding different mechanics in order to monetize the users. And we are building our own formula. This is one example, but we're actually looking at from few different angles, looking at playtime, looking at retention, and try to evaluate with the rewarded video, with interstitial, with banners, with IAP, which LTV can we get to. And after we have this, and we can kind of predict based on the data of the very initial test, whether we are going to get to a place where LTV can be higher than CPI on scale, then we move into the publishing of such game and distribute it globally. And this is where data becomes even more important, because in the first phase, you have minimum amount of data and you try to predict well. But this is what you have. You have some data and a lot of predictions and a lot of models in order to understand what will be after we launch. But once we are launching the game, then we have big amount of data. And this is where optimizing and using the data in order to make it a great business becomes super, super, super important. So let's start with how do we optimize the operations of a live game on both fronts, both monetization and user acquisition. So first of all, I'll say that in order to optimize monetization, specifically I'm speaking about ad-based games, we're looking at two steps. Step number one is how you implement the ad units within the game and how you are artificially convert users into impressions. And step two is how well are you managing your waterfall in order to convert these impressions into dollars. And then this is how you actually build the LTV in ad-based games. So I'll start with the first step of how to implement the ad units and to generate impressions out of active users. So we have two big families of ad units. You know them probably. System initiated ads, where the app is presenting an ad, depends on the definition that we have in the app itself. And we have user initiated ads, where the user decides when and how often to watch ads in order to get something back, usually some kind of reward. And there are two big differences between these two families, because as you can see here, we are looking at ARPDAU, average revenue per daily active users, that this ad unit is generating, and we are looking at the impact that it has on retention. Because the mixture of retention and ARPDAU, this is what builds the actual LTV of day 30, day 45, day 60, whatever you guys measure. And what we usually see is that for rewarded video, because it's an opt-in, because it's upon user request, we see that of course it's generating revenue and ARPDAU because user engage with ads and this is generating revenue. But also we see that in many, many cases, it actually benefits with the retention as well, because usually it adds more content to the game and it helps the player to progress in the game, to enjoy more parts of the game. And therefore, we can say that in general, for ad-based games, you want to have as many rewarded videos as possible, because it's only benefits with your LTV. It's increasing your retention, it's increasing your ARPDAU, and as you will have better engagement with rewarded video, your LTV will be higher. The challenge here, of course, is because it's an opt-in, how do you actually make the right interest for the players to decide to engage so much with rewarded video? The second family on the left side is interstitial or system-initiated ads, where, of course, interstitial as well have a significant contribution to the ARPDAU that we are generating, but we also know that when we are showing a lot of interstitial, retention goes down. And here the question is, okay, so how many interstitial should I show? How often? What is actually maximizing my LTV? And in order to analyze everything that's related to implementation of ad units, we're actually looking at a few different metrics. We are analyzing the impression per DAU rate, right? When we are looking on both engagement rate, meaning what share of your users choose to watch at least one impressions per day, usage rate, which is the average amount of impressions per day, and the multiply of these two is generating your impressions per DAU rate, right? In interstitial, it will usually be according to your decision, whether you show an interstitial every 30, 40, 60 seconds, and according to your playtime. In rewarded video, it's much different story, because here again, the impressions per DAU rate or the engagement depends on how well you will implement this ad unit in the game. And what we always do is we are analyzing it for rewarded video specifically per placement. Meaning that if we have several placements, and we should have several placements of rewarded video in the game, we want to look at them per placement, to look at the engagement rate, to look at the usage rate, to understand what works and what isn't. Maybe we should increase the reward in some places in order to drive more engagement. Maybe we need to change the visibility of the place. But what we're looking is analyzing these elements per each placement and placement within our app in order to maximize the engagement with the rewarded video, which, as I said, is crucial to the success of the game because it benefits both with ARPDAU and retention. Another thing that we always do is we compare the engagement rate that we see to what we know that the industry benchmarks is, and it's different between genre and genre. And another important thing that we always do is we also look at the engagement per user age, right? What we know is that many times you have a very good implementation of ad units for the first 10 levels, but then in day 2, we see a big drop in the engagement of users with rewarded video, and therefore we always look to maintain the engagement throughout the user age and throughout different levels in the game, and to make sure that always the reward is valuable for the user and is interesting for him to engage with. And in the bottom line, and this is the bottom line for the monetization, what we are always looking to achieve is not better retention, is not better ARPDAU, and is not better engagement with ad units. What we want to build is a better LTV. And we always, every change that we do, whether we are doing it in A/B testing simultaneously and testing 2 different strategies, or if we're looking at change throughout times, we always look at LTV per cohort to understand which setup is maximizing the LTV. And if you remember, when we spoke about interstitial, we say that you need to find the sweet spot between generating as much ARPDAU as possible and not hurting your retention too much. And finding this sweet spot is only by A/B testing, analyzing the LTV, and decide which implementation is the best. By the way, it's not only the interstitial frequency. It's also when do you show X button interstitial? Immediately, after 3 seconds, after 10 seconds. As you go more aggressive, ARPDAU will be higher, retention will be lower. Which setup maximize your LTV? There is no one answer for that, because every game has his own behavior, and A/B testing and looking at LTV of different setups is the only way for us to decide how to implement the ad units, how to generate the maximum LTV by engagement and by maximum impressions per user throughout lifetime and not on a specific day. Then after you are looking at the data and you are analyzing everything and you are deciding how to implement the ad units within your game, now you have, let's say, 8 impressions per day per user, both rewarded video and interstitial, but how am I making sure that these 8 impressions per day are generating maximum revenue for me? And this is where waterfall is getting into the picture, and is significant, because if you will optimize your waterfall, your eCPM, average eCPM would be higher, and then revenue per impression is higher, and your LTV is higher, and vice versa if you don't. And the thing that I can say about waterfall is that in general here the balance is between, on one hand, to make it as granular as possible. On the other hand, you don't want to generate too much latency, which will harm your fill rate. Latency means when the mediation needs to go instance by instance by instance by instance, you are wasting time and you are missing impressions if it takes too long. So you want to make it granular, so you'll optimize toward maximum, but you don't want to make it too long. So first of all, I can recommend to allow in a bidding, which solves this granularity versus latency balance. Then I would say that you should look at waterfall per country or group of countries separately. The right waterfall to maximize eCPM in the US is not the same waterfall in the UK, and it's not the same waterfall in Japan or in China. Different eCPM floors, different networks perform better and worse in different countries. My personal recommendation is to stay around 40 instances. This is what we find as the right balance to avoid too much of latency, and to optimize the instances on a weekly basis according to fill rate. This is how we do it in order to make sure that we are maximizing the eCPM and generating as much revenue as possible per the impressions that we have managed to generate. And everything, as I said, is done by A/B testing. We are using a few different tools on A/B testing. One tool is for the game itself, and the second tool is for the monetization itself. But for everything, we are testing. We are usually distributing 20% of our users to a new setup, and we're looking what happens to revenue DAU, of course, but ARPDAU, retention, LTV, how does it impact it per ad unit, in order to understand what is the setup that maximizes our LTV. This was for the monetization side, but I think the data is not less important or even more complicated on the user acquisition side, because on the monetization side, everything happens within your own app. On the user acquisition side, you need to digest data from several external sources, not your own app, and you need to decide how to take the right business decisions in order to optimize your user acquisition. So here as well, and we won't have time to dive deep into each group, but I can tell you that I also divide it into two different worlds. First thing is you want to optimize your IPM, your CPI, your conversion, your ads, your creatives themselves, which will help you to get more scale. And the second one is that you want to optimize your CPI, how much are you paying per install, in order to make sure that you are doing it right. For the left side, for the creatives, I'll run over it very quickly. We always recommend to run with several creative types, playables, videos, interactive end card. We know that many times in rewarded video, playables works better and interstitial not. So if you are going live only with the video, you are missing part of the inventory. If you are going live only with playable, you are missing part as well. So important to have all of them. Diversity, always challenge your current creatives. What we are doing always is we upload at least 4 creative sets. We see how they behave. We look at the winning one, we drop the losing ones, and then we upload new 3 creative to challenge this as well. And every time that we are doing it, after a few tries, we find something that improve our marketability better. And third, I will say that localization, make sure to localize your creatives if you want to actually get a good conversion outside of the US and the UK and Australia and everything that is English-speaking countries, because we see that in Europe or even in APAC, we see that localized creatives generate much better performance. The fourth tip will be make sure to refresh your creatives, because after users watch your creatives so many times, data science will stop delivering these creatives because the conversion is too low, until you will offer a new creative that will increase the probability to make an install as well, and then you are able to constantly refresh your creatives and reach those users that still didn't choose to install or to play your game. And the fifth point, which is the most important, in my opinion, is that you have to treat your creatives the same way that you treat your game. And if you look, we're looking at the past, we see that in the past, creatives was very simple. You had impressions, tap and install, and this is it. But this is not what happens today with advanced creatives like playables, like interactive end card, where there is a full world between the impressions and the tap. And in this world, there are so many input, right? When you are showing your playable to a user that plays a different game, what gets you a better CTR if the player wins or loses? Do you want him to win the playable or lose the playable? What is generating a better completion rate? What is generating a faster time to engage? These all are metrics that we are analyzing. We have a platform that Irons has built that we are using for this. And this way we can understand exactly the funnel of different creatives. Here is an example of the same playable. Some of it is, but 4 different versions of the same playable: long, short, difficult, easy. You can see the different metrics that we see per playable. And at the end of the day, we understand the funnel, and we understand, for instance, that if user has a higher CTR, if he loses the playable, we probably should make the playable a bit harder, so more users will lose and more users will click. And this is how we improve the creatives, only based on data. Just like we improve our games, we look at the engagement of different users with our creative, and we adjust our creatives into maximum engagement in order to drive more and better user acquisition. And you need to understand that today creatives is part of your onboarding funnel. It's the first engagement of the player with your game. And how well the creative will be will impact his behavior in the game as well, because this is the first engagement that you have with the player. This was for the creative side. As for the CPI side, or how much are you paying per user, first of all, I'll say that always optimize toward ARPU. Don't increase your bids in sources where the retention is higher, or the playtime is higher, or I don't know what, because there are so many metrics that impact it. At the end of the day, it's business. You want to maximize your revenue and income. You want to pay more where the ARPU is higher, and pay less where the ARPU is lower. So choose the right KPI to optimize toward it. Second is go granular. If you are just averaging everything and say, hey, my quality from iron source is X, so I'm going to pay X minus 25%, you are missing big part, because when you look at iron source and you will look at granularity of iron source, then you will see that you get users from several different apps. Some of them have a great day 3 ARPU. Some of them have a low day 3 ARPU. You shouldn't pay the same CPI for all of them. So you need to bid the same. Same for Facebook. Maybe you shouldn't bid per Instagram and Facebook the same. Same for all other SDK networks, for Google and YouTube and for any other source that have granularity of traffic within it. And what I'm saying here is that look at your LTV as granular as you can, per source, per device, per country, of course, and bid the right CPI according to the granularity level that you get, and update it constantly. Because the conditions in the market are changing all the time, meaning that if 2 weeks ago, this specific source has a great quality for you, maybe today it's not the same as the same situation, and you need to adjust your CPI. This was a very quick one, Ran, about how we do it. To summarize it, maybe I'll just say that in general, we truly believe that data is the only way to dictate our business moves, both on picking the game, decide how to implement ads and building the right LTV and to maximize it, and to manage our user acquisition on scale as efficient and as accurate as possible. We are building all the technology tools that we are building internally in order to digest all this data and to get even recommendation for business decisions from our own in-house technology in order to act right. And we believe that this is the only way to actually succeed on scale with several games and to squeeze the lemon as much as possible per game. Thank you very much for listening.
Well, thank you, Nadav. I'm sure if everyone could, they'd be giving you a round of applause. That was an excellent talk, so thank you very much. Also, really popular as well, numbers really increasing. We've got quite a few questions, so if you have some time for some questions, I'd love to ask you some of them.
For sure, happy to.
Great. So we've got Gokhan asked, what's the average ARPDAU you see on your games?
Yeah, so it's a great question. Again, you cannot look at average ARPDAU because it depends in country. I would say that in the iOS US, which is probably the leading segment that we are all looking at, for hyper casual, you want to have a ARPDAU of at least 10 cents, up to 17 cents. This would be a good metric. Again, don't forget that ARPDAU is also an averaging KPI. If you have more UA and you have more users in their day 0 or day 1, then ARPDAU is higher. If you are slowing down on UA and you have more users in day 20, your ARPDAU is lower. So don't look on the average ARPDAU. Look at the revenue per cohort and compare between the same days if you actually want to make the right decisions.
Yeah. Okay, great. Another question is for interstitials. Someone's asking how should they set it up, either with a variable for every level to show the ad or not, and also should they show, like, what's the ad frequency? How many minutes do you find is most appropriate?
Yeah, so this is a great game that we are facing with every game. And we had this question for the 3 games that we launched this year, and all of them are having millions of DAUs. So making the right decision can impact a lot our revenue. And unfortunately, there is no one truth. For one game specifically, we saw that showing in the middle of the level every 40 seconds, this was the maximum LTV that we could generate. For the other game, it was only end of level every 30 seconds. This maximized our LTV. So I wish there was a simple answer that do this and this, but think about when, just like I said, think about how often, and then A/B test different setups to find which one is the maximizing of LTV for this specific game, which is very different between different games.
Okay, yeah. Another attendee has asked, so someone has said, I've calculated that I need to show around 17 interstitials per day per DAU to get a positive ROI. Do you think that's possible?
No, 17 interstitial per day. I think that it's not really in a regular session end. I think it's not very feasible. Yeah.
And one other is, how do you suggest indies do the initial setup and optimize the waterfall setup?
So this is probably a big question. I think that if you are planning to self-publish, you have to make sure that you have the right resources. Like if you're indie and you want to publish by your own and manage monetization by your own, then you need to have someone that is doing it full-time job, that is building the waterfall, that is optimizing through it. So this is one option. The second option is to work with a publisher that will support you this. But in general, you can do it by your own if you have the time and the people. And just to structure a waterfall, give the good networks, good places in the waterfall, start getting traffic. And as you go, you will understand who performs better, who performs not as good. And you can optimize and change the waterfall according to the actual performance that you see.
Okay, we've got two other quick questions that I think we've got time for, if that's okay. What is your experience with noob/pro ads?
With whether for this creative, so we know that it works. At least it worked a few months ago. It worked very, very well. Today it's a little bit less common, but it still can work. It's only the headline that you're changing. What we recommend is after you build your video, test few different headlines and check which one is generating the best conversion. Again, it won't be the same answer for every creative, and I think this is what's nice and makes our industry so interesting. Because if all games were the same and all the solutions were the same, everything was easy. But what's nice is that every game is really his own world, and for every game there are other and different metrics or decisions to take, and this is what makes this industry so complex but so interesting simultaneously.
Yeah, I mean, someone else has asked what is a good number of interstitials to show per day per DAU. I mean, I'm wondering if, a bit like others, it's going to be varying depending on the game.
Range. I think that anywhere between, for hyper casual game, anywhere between 4 to 10. Well, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 10 depends on your actually testing, depends on your session length and playtime, and that depends on many metrics that are right for your own game. So 4 to 10, test different setups and see what maximizes your LTV.
Yeah. Someone else has put, what is your revenue split with banners, interstitials, and rewarded videos?
Yeah, so I would say that in general, what in hyper casual world, I would say that interstitial should be around 60%, RV 30%, and banners 10%. What we really try to do is to increase the share of RV. We are great believers in it, and we believe that with the right implementation, RV can be more significant than 30%, and we see the good impact that it has. So we're investing in this a lot, hopefully to get to a place where we can get, I don't know, 50, 40, 50 interstitial, 40 RV, 10 banners. This would be a setup that we are happy about, but usually it's 60, 30, 10.
And I think we've got, I know there's two more in here, but the questions keep coming. You're a very, very popular speaker. But I think we'll round off with a nice one, which is what's coming next for Supersonic?
Great. So we are currently testing several different games. Some of them are looking in a very good direction. If you remember, this is where I started my talk with. We have a very interesting CPIs and very interesting playtime and retention that indicates a good LTV. And we're planning to launch probably every 2 weeks successful game. This is the goal that we put to ourselves by end of this year, and we truly believe that by end of this year we should be the biggest publisher for hyper casual games in the industry, and this is where we are aiming to be with a nice pace of releases. But let's see, release great games and entertain people at home. It's our main mission currently.
Definitely, and I think it's obviously more important than ever at the moment. So thank you. The questions do keep coming, but I'm sure, Nadav, you will be in the meeting system, and obviously you'll be open in other areas such as social media and everything like that.
We have 5 employees of Supersonic, part of PG Connect, which you can approach any of them, and we'll be happy to take it afterward and see how can we work with you and distribute the best games in the world out there.
Fantastic. So yeah, so I'm really sorry to everyone that we can't get through all the questions. It's just been such a popular talk and such a popular speaker. But yeah, I wanted to say a massive thank you to you, Nadav, not just for a really fascinating talk, but obviously to Supersonic in general for, you know, sponsoring this track and helping bring all of this, these wonderful insights to the industry.
Happy to do it and happy to keep pushing the industry forward. We are here for this, and thank you very much for hosting me.